Morning, everyone. We are now on Perek Yud, Mishna Zayin. We previously learned that in order for a prisbol to be written, the prisbol, the document that protects debts from being canceled by Shlita, the person, the borrower, has to own land in order for the prisbol to be able to be effective. So the Mishnah is going to have an interesting discussion about whether a certain situation is considered that you own land. Kveres Tavarim, a beehive. Okay. Now, the case of this beehive is the following. It's a beehive. It's got, cakes of honey inside. And if this beehive seemingly is a movable object, right? It's not land. It's not real estate. The whole point is that we want the borrower to have a piece of land because land is always collectible. Now you have this beehive. It's a movable object. Nonetheless, the case of the Mishnah is the following. The case of the Mishnah is that you put this beehive on the ground. And it's a situation where you put it there, and that's where you're going to leave it. That's where you're going to leave it. You put it down on the ground, that's where you're going to leave it. Now, if you would have actually let's say, cemented, done something to really connect the beehive to the ground, then it would be considered part of the ground. That happens all the time. Something connected to the ground is considered like the ground. And if, let's say, this beehive was sitting on pegs above the ground, it wouldn't be considered like, there would be no question that it wouldn't be considered like the ground. Here, the Mishnah discussion is where you set it on the ground. You did not, though, do anything to cement it to the ground. If you would have cemented it to the ground, done something to really connect it to the ground, then we would say it's like the ground. Here, the situation is you just put it on the ground. You could move it away, but you have no plans to do it. This is where it's going to stay. Rabbi Eliezer says, that has the status of land. And therefore, because of an alea prisbol, you can write a prisbol on it. It's considered like the borrower has land. It doesn't become susceptible to tuma in its place. This is a separate rule. The rule is that movable objects are susceptible to tuma, ritual impurity. The ground is not. Anything connected to the ground, it's considered like the ground. So in this case, where you take the beehive and you set it on the ground, you didn't cement it, but you're putting it on the ground, that's where it's meant to stay. According to Rabbi Eliezer, it's considered like the ground or connected to the ground that much that we say it doesn't become susceptible to any kind of ritual impurity. If one of the dead rodents that makes something tamei comes into contact with it, it's not going to make it tamei. Now, here is another different halacha, and this is a Shabbos halacha, Shabbos law. You've got this beehive; it has cakes of honey in it, and you're now going to basically detach one of those cakes of honey from the inside of the beehive. You're doing it on Shabbos. So we say, according to Rabbi Eliezer, you take this beehive, you set it on the ground, and you now go ahead and you detach one of the cakes of honey from the beehive. We say chayav. We say you're liable. You're liable for transgressing Shabbos. If you did it unintentionally, you'd be chayav a sin offering, a chatas. So here too, regarding this halach of Shabbos, there's a relevance to the point of saying that this beehive is connected to the ground. Now, we have to back up. Let's explain this halacha first. What kind of malacha, what would be wrong with detaching the honey from the beehive on Shabbos? And the answer is, at the end, we're going to consider this a malacha of kotzer, reaping. You're detaching something from where it grows. Now, if something is not connected to the ground, then wherever it grows from is not necessarily going to be a problem of kotzer, of reaping. A beehive, right? Again, it's a separate object. You're setting it on the ground. There's no nourishment from the ground, right? It's not growing from the ground. And therefore, essentially, we really need to explain why is it kotzer? Why is it reaping? Reaping is on something that grows from the ground. This is not growing from the ground. And according to Rabbi Eliezer, the Talmud teaches us that what you have here is actually a beehive, and there's a scriptural support. There's a scriptural basis based on a certain pasuk in Tanakh that basically describes a beehive like a tree growing from the ground. That's what happens in these pasuk sukkim, in these scriptures. And therefore, based on the fact that Scripture has compared it, the beehive, like a tree growing from the ground, then okay, based on that scriptural support, we say, well, if you detach something from a tree, it's forbidden on Shabbos because of kotzer, because of reaping. So too, if you go ahead and you detach some honey, the honey cake from the hive, it's like detaching from a tree. Okay, that's what this scriptural source teaches us. If that's really the point, then what do we need Rebbe Lezer's opinion that the beehive on the ground is not connected to the ground? I mean, if we have the scriptural source, have the scriptural source. And the answer is that the scriptural source is actually not enough. Wouldn't it be enough for the laws of Shabbos to be able to say that it's considered like growing from the ground if it doesn't have any connection to the ground? If it's just it's like a pot or something full of honey, it's not going to help you to say, well, based on the scriptural source, which again is not a implicit source. It's a source that we very often use to derive things from, and it's not an explicit source to say that it's like connected to the ground and chayiv on Shabbos. Just because I have the scriptural source isn't giving me enough to say that for Shabbos I desecrated Shabbos because I did the act of kotzer, of reaping, of harvesting. It's not going to work. So therefore, Rebbe Lezer says no. The honeycomb is sitting on the ground. Because it's sitting on the ground and it's in its permanent place. Then we say, okay, it's in a permanent place, I connected to the ground. Now that it's connected to the ground, and we have the scriptural source to say that it's considered like a tree, that the honeycomb is considered like a tree, the two together allow us to now say that you would be liable for doing an act of reaping on Shabbos if you take off one of the cakes of honey from the beehive on Shabbos, but again, on a beehive that's sitting on the ground in its permanent place. Something I didn't mention before, and that was on the part of the Mishna that says, because when it's sitting on the ground, the Mishna said, it's not susceptible to tumah in its place. That means that only while it's sitting on the ground in its permanent place do we consider it connected to the ground, and therefore not susceptible to tumah. But if let's say it was on the ground, and then you moved it off the ground, and while it was not in its place, when you moved it off the ground, that's when the tumah came into contact with it. It's going to become tummy. Essentially, it is a movable object, just that when it sits on the ground in a permanent way, we see it like being part of the ground, not connected to the ground. But if it's not in its place, it's not on the ground anymore, then we see it as a movable object and be susceptible to tumah. So this is Rebbe Lezer's opinion. Lezer's opinion is that this beehive sitting on the ground in a permanent way is considered like attached to the ground. And therefore, according to him, if it's like the ground itself as it's attached to the ground, you can write a principle for it. It's not susceptible to tumah as long as it's sitting there in its place. And if you remove one of the cakes of honey from the beehive on Shabbos, you'll be liable for desecrating Shabbos. On the bottom here in the Yad of Rum, they bring down a comment that perhaps using a beehive was just an example of something that is really movable, but you would set it down on the ground and leave it there. It could very well be, that maybe the honeycomb was an example, but it can apply to anything. Perhaps anything that you go ahead and it's something that you would permanently leave there. I don't know if it means it's something that's the kind of thing you would, but I'll read it to you here. It stands to reason that the issue disputed here concerns any movable object placed on the ground which resembles a beehive being permanently placed on one spot. If you would take any movable object and you were to seriously say, this is where it's going to stay, it wouldn't have to just be that any object would be like a beehive then regarding this discussion of the Mishnah. The beehive is merely used as an example of a movable object which is placed on the ground on a permanent basis. Beehive would probably be something that would be more typical to do that on. But it would just be an example for any movable object that you could say that you are leaving it here permanently on the ground, and that would also include a discussion of the Mishnah. So we just now discussed Rebbe Lezer's opinion, but the Chachamim say, the sages argue, they say, Eina kakarka, that without being actually cemented, really connected to the ground, it's not like the ground, and therefore, in case of a prismal, you can't write a prismal over it. And it will be susceptible to tumah even as it sits in its permanent place. The one who removes the cake of honey from it on Shabbos is going to be exempt. According to the way they learn it here, the exemption here for Shabbos revolves around not even just the question about whether it's connected to the ground, but it seems there's even a question about this whole scriptural source that says that we consider the honeycomb like a tree, as to whether the sages actually explain that source, that actually argue on Rebbe Lezer in the explanation of that verse. Therefore, there is no source to say that it's considered like a tree. Okay, that is today's Mishnah. Next, the mitzvah. Prohibition against cheating another person in regard to buying and selling. As the pasuk states, if you sell something to someone or buy it from someone, you shall not wrong, one person shall not wrong, you shall not wrong one another. Wronging here means cheating. Now, we're not going to go into right now what exactly is called cheating. You don't sell things only for principal price. You got to make a profit. At what point does your charge become cheating, become overcharging and cheating? That's a discussion on its own, which he doesn't get into. Whether he intentionally cheated or he didn't know that there was an overcharge in the sale. Yes, whatever the basis is to be considered an overcharge, he didn't know it. He didn't realize that it was here. It was in this case. Chayav l'shalem. The general rule is, again, this is the starting point. There's many details to this, but the starting point is that you can charge up to a sixth more than its general selling price. So in a situation where the person, charged and didn't realize that he was overcharging, at the end of the day, chayav l'shalem, you got to pay him back. The overcharge, how much you cheated him, you have to return it to him. This applies in all places at all times, both by men and by women. Let's just do the next mitzvah. A prohibition against oppressing someone or hurting someone with words. Shenema, as the pasuk says, "Al tainu ishas hamisai," which again is translated as a person should not wrong his friend. It's really the exact same words that we had before when it came to cheating, by aggrieving someone with money. It says, don't hurt the person, don't wrong the person. But actually the Torah in Parshas Bahar says it twice, the same words twice. The context of the pasuk is monetary, but it says it twice. Al tainu ishas hamisai, do not wrong one another. The second time it says it, the sages understood that it's not just talking about anymore wronging someone with money by cheating them, but it means hurting them, wronging them with words. A person should not say to a person who has become observant and wasn't always observant during their lifetime, remember what you did before. Remember what you used to do. Remember what you used to do, and you're doing it again to make him feel bad. You say to a person who's a convert, or the child of a convert, oh, you know what your grandfather used to do. Again, all in for the purpose of hurting or embarrassing him. Or to ask some matter of wisdom from someone who doesn't have wisdom. Basically, all for the purpose of causing him distress. You're basically making him feel bad. You're asking him a question, he doesn't know it, but you're asking him anyway to make him feel bad. That's hurting someone with words. And basically the rule, it's the kind of thing where you say something to him that he can't really get out of. He can't deny it. He can't say it's not true. It is true. And therefore, at the end of the day, since he can't deny that, he can't deny it. There's no way of denying it. He can't really, just tell you it's not true and respond and say what you're saying is wrong. Those are the examples of what falls under what we call a noas devarim, wronging someone with words. Okay, so maybe noas devarim and anything similar when it comes to causing pain with words. Anytime you say something to a person for the purposes of hurting him, that would be, and again, it's something that he really cannot deny what you're saying to him. These are the kinds of words of wronging someone with words that this prohibition is referring to. Have a great day. Be well.